Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are going to completely unplug. We're stepping right out of our hyper-connected, fast-paced modern world, and we're dropping straight into a freezing cold October morning in 1834. We'll be riding along with a husband and wife, Zachariah and Hannah Hildreth, who lived in Townsend. And by zooming in on just one single day in their lives, we're going to uncover this incredibly fascinating ecosystem of family survival, unspoken bonds, and just absolutely relentless work.
Let's actually kick things off with this unbelievable thought directly from Zachariah. I mean, just feel the intensity of that phrasing. He isn't casually checking a weather app on his phone, right? He's watching the sky like a man watches a debtor. That immediately sets up the literal life-or-death stakes of an autumn morning back then. For a farming family like the Hildreth, survival hinges entirely on beating the weather. If the frost hits before the corn is safely harvested, all that spring planting, all that summer tending, totally ruined. Mother Nature has the final say here, and they are basically in a full sprint race against her.
So let's get into part one, the dawn of a harvest day and the very real threat of the morning frost.
We're starting way before the sun is even up. The house is absolutely freezing, and the day's grueling labor kicks off right away. Seeing this timeline really puts it into perspective, doesn't it? It shows just how much critical action is going down before most of us today have even poured our first cup of coffee. Zachariah rolls out of bed, braving that October chill to build the fire before Hannah even wakes up. By the time the sun actually peaks over the horizon, he and his 17-year-old son James are already out in the fields hacking away at the corn. And get this, by midday, an entire field of corn is harvested. It is a completely relentless pace dictated 100% by the season.
Now you might be wondering why they're rushing so hard. Well, it all comes down to this number right here, 2. Why 2? Because there have already been 2 hard frosts this exact week. This isn't some leisurely, romantic autumn harvest festival. This is a quiet, urgent panic. They have to get the absolute last of that corn under cover before a third frost rolls in and wipes out their food supply for the winter. That impending invisible threat, it's basically hanging over every single thing they do today.
What's super fascinating here is the contrast between their internal worlds. Look at how Hannah and Zachariah process the exact same morning. Over on the left, Hannah kind of assumes her husband's silence just means he's strictly focused on the chores. She notes he simply doesn't say much. But then, on the right, we get this amazing sneak peek into Zachariah's busy, incredibly appreciative internal monologue. He notices that 14-year-old Clarissa is practically becoming her mother's right hand. He notices that 17-year-old James is built more like a man than a boy now. He takes it all in, even if the strict stoic culture of the 1830s means he basically never voices that appreciation out loud.
And that brings us to the kids, which brilliantly illustrates the reality of running a 19th century household. The 5 Hildreth children aren't just, family members being looked after. They are a highly organized, completely vital workforce where every single hand matters. James, at 17, is doing full-on man's labor out in the field. Clarissa and 12-year-old Elizabeth are keeping the kitchen and all the heavy domestic chores moving. Even little 10-year-old Milo is out there gathering corn with his dad. And, well, as you can see at the bottom there, even 3-year-old Edward tries to help. Much to his poor mother's dismay, his version of helping involves carrying wet stockings to the fence and just dropping them right in the dirt.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 2, the women's work, and how they held the domestic sphere together. So, as the sun fully rises, turning the local Townsend maples the color of a pumpkin, Hannah takes on a massive, monumental task of her own. You look at this list and it's crystal clear. There is absolutely no getting around the brutal physical toll of 19th century domestic work. Because wash day happens to fall on this specific week, Hannah's out there hauling incredibly heavy buckets of water. She's scrubbing harsh lye soap into shirts and stockings that are thick with an entire summer's worth of dirt, and she's physically wringing out that heavy, freezing wet fabric until her hands quite literally ache. Plus, just like the guys out in the field, she is racing the weather. She has to get every single piece of clothing hung on the fences and bushes to dry before the evening frost sets in.
But, it isn't literally all just backbreaking labor. We also get a glimpse of the essential social fabric here. Hannah sends Elizabeth down the road to trade the very last of their pears for Mrs. Sawtell's quince preserves. And Elizabeth comes back not just with sweet treats, but with the most vital currency of the era, local news. The Fletcher girl's getting married in November. This tiny tidbit sparks a rare, super delightful 15 minutes of gossip over the mending basket. It gives them this desperately needed mental break, and it really highlights how these rural, isolated households actually stay deeply, deeply connected to their neighbors.
All right, Section 3, the men's work, racing against the sky. While Hannah is sweating over the wash tubs, Zachariah and his sons are out in the field working purely with their backs. They are cutting and husking corn side by side in almost total silence. But here's a cool detail. Zachariah isn't just a farmer, he is also a cooper, which means he makes barrels. And as he works the field, you can see this profound psychological difference between his two jobs. Farming? That's planting, tending, hoping, and ultimately, knowing the weather has the final say. It is completely out of his hands. But coopering? Now that is a craft of pure control. A barrel is built stave by stave, hoop by hoop, and it holds water exactly as well as the man built it. It gives him this profound sense of agency in a world that is otherwise totally ruled by unpredictable seasons.
So in the afternoon, with the corn mostly brought in, Zachariah moves over to his bench in the barn to execute these exact steps. He's shaping the staves, fitting the hoops, pushing to get 6 more barrels ready before the big November cider pressing. And what's really beautiful about this is the interconnectedness of their day. While Zachariah works in the barn, the constant knock, knock, knock of his mallet drifts all the way across the yard and right into the kitchen window. For Hannah, that noise isn't an annoyance at all. It's a rhythm of survival. She actually finds it deeply comforting, to the point where if the hammering stops, she catches herself holding her breath, just listening for it to start up again.
And the best part? That feeling is entirely mutual. While he's hammering away in the barn, Zachariah can hear the familiar sounds of his family, Hannah and the girls washing, little Edward inevitably getting scolded. This quote from Zachariah beautifully captures the unspoken shared purpose that drives all of his relentless labor. He doesn't actually need to be in the same room as his family. Just hearing the hum of the household working behind him, that's what fuels his ability to keep swinging that mallet.
Let's move to Section 4, the evening hearth, coming together at dusk.
So the sun finally drops. The family comes back together inside, utterly exhausted but victorious. Every single ear of corn is safely tucked away. 10-year-old Milo walks in from the fields. He's still got corn silk stuck in his hair. He's dead tired, but he is just bursting with pride. And he asks this incredibly touching question: did I do a man's work today? And both Hannah and Zachariah, completely independent of each other, give him the exact validation he's craving. Zachariah figures there's just no sense in withholding the truth from a boy who's genuinely earned it. And you better believe Milo sits a little bit taller at the supper table that night because of it.
Speaking of the supper table, what a supper it is. It's set with simple but absolutely vital fuel. We're talking a big pot of Hannah's baked beans, the very last of the summer's bread, and some stewed pumpkin. And let me tell you, this food disappears incredibly fast, which is exactly what happens when your family has been burning through immense calories in the fields and over heavy wash tubs since before the sun even came up.
After supper is cleared, the hearth turns into this scene of quiet, warm contentment. It's like a perfect snapshot of 19th century evening entertainment. Clarissa is practicing reading out loud from the almanac. James and Milo are quietly arguing over a game of jackstraws they've literally invented out of leftover kindling sticks. And 3-year-old Edward, he is out cold. He's dozing heavily right against his father's arm while Zachariah just quietly smokes his pipe.
And that brings us to our final section, the quiet reward, exploring those unspoken bonds and shared purpose.
As the busy house finally settles down and the kids are tucked into bed, check out how the couple's final thoughts of the day perfectly mirror one another. They catch each other's eye across the room. Now, there are no grand, sweeping speeches of affection here. Zachariah simply notes that Hannah doesn't need to say anything. He already knows. They share this incredibly deep, weathered, emotional connection that, after years and years of surviving these harsh seasons together, requires absolutely no words at all.
As Hannah looks out the window at that empty field where the corn used to stand, she has this realization that perfectly sums up the core thesis of their 1834 existence. It is an ecosystem where every single person's labor genuinely truly matters. The quiet of the evening isn't just a pause in their schedule, right? It's a tangible reward. It was earned by the collective effort of every single hand in that family pulling in the exact same direction.
So, as we leave the Hildreth farm behind and step back into our fast-paced modern lives, I really want you to consider this. How might we recapture that profound sense of shared effort and silent appreciation today? I mean, sure, we might not be racing a deadly frost to harvest our corn, but figuring out how to build a life where everyone's contributions are valued and where we share a deeply unified purpose with the people around us, that is a challenge that's just as relevant right now as it was in October of 1834. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.